Hello and welcome back to the Innovation Room, a podcast where we sit down and talk with researchers, authors, leaders and innovators, and a bunch of other fascinating people about the tools, strategies and tactics for taking our innovation efforts further. This episode is brought to you by Hype Innovation. I'm Colin Nelson, the host of today's episode, and I was delighted to be joined by Rowan Gibson. Now, according to Forbes, Rowan is one of the most recognised thought leaders in the field of innovation. He's the best-selling author of 3 major books, Rethinking the Future, Innovation to the Core, and my personal favourite, The 4 Lenses of Innovation. Rowan was awarded Global Leader of Innovation for his significant contribution to the field. He's the president of Imagination Bridge, a leading global consulting firm in the field of strategic innovation. He's also a top public speaker, an executive educator. Some even refer to Rowan as the strategic secret weapon and an innovation catalyst for some of the world's largest organizations, many of which you will have heard of, the likes of Apple, Bayer, Coke, Dell, IBM, Mars, Microsoft, Philips, and Procter & Gamble. And without any further ado, here's my interview with Rowan. Good to see you. How are you today?
Good to see you, as always.
So, Rowan, I've known you for some years now,
Yes.
but one question I've never asked you is, how did you find yourself in the innovation industry? What's your background?
Well, that is a deep question that requires a deep answer. And I'm trying to avoid getting as long-winded as possible. But I will say this. I was impressed many years ago by a guru in the world of leadership, and that was Warren Bennis. You may remember Warren Bennis.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful gentleman, met him in California. And he talked about an invented life. He wrote a book actually called An Invented Life. And the reason I'm bringing that up is I sort of feel like I invented this life because it's what I wanted to do. So I'd always been involved and interested in creativity. In fact, I started out my career in the advertising industry. So, you know, I have sort of creative blood. But I very quickly migrated towards strategy. So it became advertising strategy, marketing strategy, business strategy. And then a lot of my work revolved around the launch of innovative new products and the development of innovative new products and services. As a matter of fact, in the early 80s, I was involved in the launch of Philips compact disc to the
Oh, wow.
world.
Really?
Yeah. So that's going back to the 80s, you know. So by the 90s, I'd already gone independent and, I'd begun work on my first book, which was called Rethinking the Future. And Rethinking the Future is all about, developing a future strategy so that you can compete for the future, as Gary Hamel and C.K. Prahalad used to say. So that led me into the whole innovation field. And, I've been in that field since the 90s, since the early 90s, really. And here we are in 2024, which is frightening.
What happened, right?
Yeah, what happened? Yeah. So a couple of books in between, one book, Innovation to the Core, is kind of a seminal work published by Harvard Business School Press, about how you build a deep, enduring, all the time, everywhere capability for innovation that's analogous to what we did with things like quality, and what we're doing with sustainability and those kind of enterprise capabilities that involve everyone, everywhere, every day. So that's kind of where I am. And then there's a little bit of stuff in between, but okay.
Well, the funny thing is when people ask me about how I end up in the innovation industry and why I work in the innovation industry, I find the second thing easier to answer than the first. And I always say, well, I'm in front of the bleeding edge in every industry. Where else would you want to be? What else? You get to see things before they become available, change before it happens. It's just a fascinating space. And once you're in, it's very hard to get out. And maybe you don't want to, but it's always interesting how people end up in this.
Well, your answer is better than mine, Colin, I have to say.
So, we talk about innovation to core. Where did you start to formulate that there's something to be said, that warrants a book that isn't already being said? Where did your ideas and your methodologies come from? Because I think that I'm in the process of writing a book right now, and sometimes you spot an area which is seemingly under discussed, underexploited, a little insight or a little hunch that you think, I want to explore this with the world. Where did that come from?
Well, going back to the first book, Rethinking the Future, what I did is I worked with pretty much all of the best known, gurus of the time. We don't really have that term so much anymore.
No, that's
the
popular,
business
isn't it?
gurus.
Yeah.
And so then it went, thought leaders and whatever. But, it was people like Warren Bennis, like Gary Hamel, C.K. Prahalad, Philip Kotler, Charles Handy, John Nesbitt, all the greats basically of the day. And out of that came quite a deep collaboration with Gary Hamel.
Mm.
And Gary Hamel was involved at that time in thinking about innovation in terms of enterprise capability. Because up until that point, as you well know, companies had tended to think about innovation as a sort of unit or a department. People kind of sequestered into this innovation unit thing. Sometimes it was outside of the mothership. So we had the famous story of Xerox PARC, Palo Alto Research Center, that
Yep.
they developed a bunch of stuff, but the mothership never really leveraged that and exploited those opportunities. So that was where we were, and Gary and I were working together, and we started talking about this whole issue of building an enterprise capability for innovation. Why can't innovation be like quality? Why
Mm.
can't innovation be like, anything else, supply chain management, customer service? Why
Mm.
why can't it be an enterprise capability? Rather like, we saw Toyota do this in the early days and the other Japanese manufacturing companies. We saw them do this with quality, where they took it from being a department with some quality inspectors in white coats who were the only people responsible and accountable for quality, and they were able to turn it into this thing that everyone was involved with
Yeah.
across the entire company. So that was the birth of, could we do that for innovation? It started out as management theory, and I'm glad to say over the years we've turned it into management science, because it's proven now by the fact that we've done it in so many companies.
Indeed, and what we discover, of course, is the more diversity of opinion we have in that innovation conversation, the more creative we are, and involving the people that perhaps never would have thought of themselves as being responsible or involved in innovation. The people from the legal department and the finance groups and the
Absolutely.
HR functions, they've all got a role to play, and making it everybody's job is still something I think a lot of organizations are striving for, to see that culture. But let me ask you a
Oh, yeah.
question, because you referenced sort of quality standards and things. We have later this year ISO standards coming out for innovation. Now, some people will say, hey, you can't standardize innovation, we shouldn't have standards. There are others that say, no, this gives us legitimacy, it gives us a framework to follow. Where do you stand in terms of that path?
Oh, I've campaigned for ISO standard for innovation for, I'm going to say years. It might even be decades. I mean, I'm going to say one of the claims to fame is I came up with the term innovation excellence.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can remember the moment where I said, well, most companies are looking at operational excellence. Why can't we become operationally excellent at innovation, just as we're operationally excellent at quality or anything else? And the fact is, if you ask a leadership team, you ask an executive committee of a company, the top people of the company, how strategically important is innovation to the future, to the destiny of this organization? Everybody's going to say it's absolutely critical, more so than quality, more so than supply chain management, more so than any of those other things, because that's where we're going to get growth, that's where we're going to get competitive advantage, that's how we're going to drive disruption rather than be disrupted. All of those things add up to, it's got to be innovation. And yet companies still today don't impose any form of global standard or world-class standard of excellence. And so I set out years ago to sort of set up, a model for achieving innovation excellence at a company. I'm still working with a lot of organizations too. I mean, I said the other day in a masterclass, just that people said, Rowan, why are you still doing this? I said, well, probably when I'm 90, I'll still be on a stage somewhere, and people would say, why are you doing this? And I'll say, there are still a few companies out there that haven't achieved innovation excellence, so it's kind of a vocational thing.
Yeah, I think I think it's fascinating for me, and I agree with you. By the way, I think the standardization is going to help dramatically, and it's also going to help the organizations that perhaps haven't had to innovate to save their bacon at some point in their life. So maybe the more services orientated organizations that they don't have innovation baked into the DNA of necessarily how they work, but are now perhaps seeing opportunities with technology or even disruption and thinking, well, where do we go? And I think in those cases that's going to be incredibly helpful for those industries. Now, I want to take you back, because I remember first seeing you speak, and I think it was a conference in Munich, if I remember correctly, and you were talking about, at that point, I think it was your new book. It's a few years old now, which is The Four Lenses of Innovation, and that's my favorite. And an example that you made really stuck in my mind, which was about challenging orthodoxies. And you asked the audience, tell me everything that's wrong with a paint can. And that stuck in my mind for a long time, because you made the point that a paint can essentially is a terrible piece of design, and we can come up with a list of 20 problems associated with it. And I thought it was a really good illustration of challenging conventional thinking and challenging orthodoxies. Now, the reason I'm still percolates in my mind is because I'm seeing organizations that are being disrupted and need to think differently, but are still very uncomfortable with challenging orthodoxies. And I wonder what your experience has been in terms of helping leadership break out of that cycle of what we do today is most comfortable, and we have to start asking ourselves more difficult, more interesting, more orthodoxy challenging questions.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I came up with the four lenses of innovation. Because so just very briefly, those four lenses are so they're four key perspectives that all innovation is built on. Really, I mean, you could go back to the beginnings of time, to the ancient Egyptians, the Natufians. Anybody that's ever innovated by whatever it was they were doing, working with irrigation systems around the Nile, or inventing cuneiform writing, or the wheel, or whatever it was. No? And you can examine any example of innovation right up to today, you know, and it will be built on one or more of those lenses. So they are, number one, challenging orthodoxy. So being contrarian. If everyone is zigging, why don't we zag? What if? Why not? Those kinds of questions. The second lens of innovation is called harnessing trends. So there's always change going on in the world, and the innovators grab and harness that change. It's almost like Shakespeare once wrote, there is a tide in the affairs of men, which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune. So what I read into that is, get out your surfboard, surf those trends at the tide, and it leads on to fortune. And if you don't, it's probably going to turn into a tsunami that'll wash you away as a company, as we saw with Kodak and the Blockbuster and those things. So that's the second lens, is harnessing trends. Third is called leveraging resources in new ways. So this is about saying every organization is a set of core competencies and strategic assets. How could we redeploy those resources to build new opportunities? Or how could we leverage external competencies and assets from other organizations, either partnering or licensing technology or buying the company, whatever. So that's leveraging resources. And the fourth lens is really that kind of holy grail around understanding unmet, unarticulated customer needs, and then designing solutions from the customer backwards. But coming back to your question about challenging orthodoxies, the problem is with companies, they tend to use a couple of those lenses pretty well. So they tend to look at trends, they tend to look at customer insights or consumer insights. They're not so good. Yeah, they're not so good at leveraging resources in new ways, although that does happen. That gives us some great cases we can talk about. But challenging orthodoxies tends to be difficult. So what I do is I get a company to systematically list its orthodoxies, list its assumptions about who we think we're serving, which customer groups, in which markets do we believe we're serving or should be serving. What exactly is it that we're providing? Let's list our assumptions around our products and services. Also, how we provide those things, how we go to market, how we develop our solutions and bring them to the market, how we make money. Are there assumptions there about there's only one way of making money in this industry? Maybe there are other financial models. And number five, how we differentiate, because there may be other ways that we can differentiate ourselves. So we challenge orthodoxies across the entire business model. First thing is we list them, and then we say, what if we reverse those assumptions? What if we reverse those orthodoxies? What new opportunities would arise? So coming back finally again to your question, it's not easy to, I mean, it's quite easy to get people to challenge the orthodoxies in the first place, but it's almost like you bring people to the edge of the diving board up there at the top level, and then they see that, yeah, we really should be challenging this thing, but actually doing it, actually taking the leap and challenging some deep-seated orthodoxy about how to do business, or the profit engine we currently have around a particular product or service, that takes some guts, that takes courage for an organization to actually follow through and do that.
I agree. I'm reminded of an organization that I worked with in the past. It's a fairly famous public example in Stora Enso, which is a pulp and paper company.
I know them well.
Yeah. So that journey that they went through, which is to look at their business and see that paper production is going to drop to 40% of peak levels. Nothing we can do about that. That is a trend, and we need to start thinking about how we can leverage our assets. One of your other lenses in order to do something very, very different. And they set up a biomaterials business and hired a lot of people from Dow Chemical and BASF, and they set up an entirely separate operation as the future of their business. And then they leaned out the traditional business to maximize what can be done. And I think that's a really good illustration of an organization be prepared to ask itself some tougher questions and make some very adventurous decisions. But I think
very often, Colin, what happens is some great threat comes along. I mean, I can remember having the same conversation with United Paper Mills, with UPM, also in Helsinki, 15 years ago, where I was talking to the executive committee, and I said, we're going to have with the iPhone and the iPad and the desktop, we're not going to be buying so many physical newspapers and physical magazines anymore because all of the media is moving to digital. So you need to be thinking outside of paper. And just like Stora, they did the same thing. But there's an interesting twist to the story, is all of the paper companies basically were forced to rethink the future at that moment to challenge their orthodoxies. And all of them began to diversify into other sort of paper-based products, packaging and whatever, labeling and so on. But UPM challenged the orthodoxy that we've got to get out of paper. So it was like there's an interesting twist, because now Stora is saying maybe we got out of too much of the paper, traditional paper business, and UPM stayed, with some traditional paper stuff, and actually they're doing better in that field than we are. So sometimes there's nuances to it. Yeah,
of course. Well, I mean, I think you raised a really good point, which is it's often the disruption or the fear factor that's promoting organizations to be prepared to challenge those orthodoxies and look at our core competencies and assets, and maybe we can leverage them in another way. Because at some point you've got to sell it to the shareholders, right? You've got to say there's a big change in our business strategy, and this is why.
And that's coming back again to your thing about challenging authors. Human beings don't usually act until there's some motivation, and the motivation, in my mind and my experience, is either positive or negative. Positive is, while there's some great new opportunity, we should go after that. Negative is, oh my God, if we don't do this, we're going to die. And I found in my experience that the positive stuff is not so much of a motivator as the negative stuff.
I completely agree.
When you can see the tsunami coming, that's when and it's usually relatively late or even too late. That's when the threat becomes real, and companies are galvanized to actually do something about things.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's a shame that we can't bake into that thinking more regularly organizations that are continually becoming, reinventing themselves. It's just it makes sense for
that's exactly what I'm trying to do, Colin. This is the point.
I know
if we can, if we can embed this innovation as an enterprise capability, and part of that is using the 4 lenses all the time across an organization, then you should be continually, systematically, proactively challenging your orthodoxies, looking for trends, harnessing the trends, leveraging resources, in new ways, and continually designing solutions based on customer needs.
Yeah, I completely agree, and certainly something that I push for my clients to care about a lot as well. So let's just take a slight sidestep. I'm very interested in your perspective on the key challenges for innovators today. Innovation's moved quite a long way since you and I started in the industry, and where it stands. Where do you see the challenges for corporate innovators, especially? We work in an ever-changing world. Disruptions coming from technologies left, right, and center. I think none of us would have anticipated the amount of disruptions that we've been through in the last 15 years. But yes, here we are. We should, I think, create more opportunities for innovation. But how do you see it? Where do you think the biggest challenges are?
I think there's a bunch of, challenges that have been around for a while. And as you say, there are things that are coming along that become, if you will, new challenges. But we've always had things like leaders, that have different priorities, that may prioritize other things outside of it. Although they preach innovation, they don't kind of like walk the talk by allocating the proper resources to innovation, not just money, but people and time. So especially if you look at certain regions of the world, North America very well, and the economy over there, or up there from where I am. I'm in Costa Rica at the moment. Where there's a lot of quarter-to-quarter thinking. It's all short-term thinking, And we both know that, innovation, a lot of it is going to be mid to long term, especially the big strategic stuff. Well, of course, we have to think short term sometimes. And COVID taught us that, you have to turn things around very, very quickly. But, there's that kind of lack of leadership commitment that continues to be a big issue. I would say that another thing that is becoming more important today is the ability to show success with innovation. When we get to the subject of success metrics or innovation metrics in general, and that I think comes full circle to your issue around ISO. I mean, if you can't measure quality levels, how on earth can you possibly achieve quality excellence or ISO? And the same goes for innovation. If we're not measuring not just the outputs from innovation, but also the inputs and the throughputs. So, which brings us back to leadership commitment. If the inputs to innovation are, the percentage of people that we're involving, engaging in innovation, the percentage of the capital budget that we're devoting to truly innovative projects, strategic projects that are going to be game changers, the throughputs, measuring how fast ideas are making their way through the pipeline. Are we too stringent with our kind of stage and gate process where we're killing off ideas prematurely or whatever those things might be? So can we put metrics in place? And again, if you go back to innovation to the core, I was talking about this all the way back then, that here's a comprehensive set of metrics that you can use. But still, in every single innovation masterclass, I ask my participants from all of the very large organizations in the world, and they all say that, no, we don't really have any serious metrics around innovation. So that I think is becoming more and more challenging because I think there's more pressure on the innovators to show results. And there's no way that they can get to those results unless we put those input and throughput metrics in place. So that I think is becoming an issue. And I would add one third one, which is this kind of desire to do everything quickly and simply. It's everything's a 3-day sprint or a design thinking workshop day, or press the green button and it'll do everything for you. Especially now with AI coming along, people are thinking, well, gee, why don't we just ask Chat GPT, to do the innovation for us? So come up with some ideas for X, and then give me the launch strategy for that.
We've seen it done, yeah.
Absolutely. And so let's not forget that, I'm not going to rope you into the same generation that I'm in because I think I'm a little older than you. But there's a new generation coming along, and that generation, has grown up with the quick and easy apps and buttons and quick ways of doing things. And so, do they really want to spend the time doing things robustly and thoroughly and rigorously? In terms of, let's say spending 3 months on a strategic innovation project in order to secure the future of this company, rather than, okay, let's do everything very quick and easy and cheap in 1 day or 2 days and hope that we're going to save the world.
I've seen it many times. A shortcut is attractive,
Course,
especially when innovation isn't given the due respect and resources and capacity it needs to be done properly in certain organizations. But I wanted to go back to something you mentioned earlier, which I think is really interesting about KPIs and metrics. And I've had this ongoing frustration is that organizations don't measure the cost of doing nothing. They don't measure the cost of standing still. Yet we all know that if you don't keep and develop what you do, eventually your revenues and your profits will drop because the markets will become more competitive. You'll get disrupted. Things happen. We have history. We can look at that predictably. You don't sell the same thing. You mentioned Philips CD. It wasn't something that lasted in forever. Yeah, there comes a point where it starts to decline. We have history to look at. There is a cost of standing still, and if we have that cost of standing still, then it makes it much easier to justify an investment in the future and protecting the organization. And I think you're right. I think things like ISO will help mature some of those areas of conversation, and for innovators to be able to express to leaders who, frankly, innovation was not on the curriculum when they did their MBA classes, express in a way which is meaningful to them what the money side of this portfolio of things we're working on really looks like. Fantastic. Well, one final question then before I let you go is, where do you think the big opportunities are for innovators? I mean, I think this is an exciting time. I'm seeing new industries putting more energy into innovation. We obviously have this ongoing acceleration of technological innovation. We have tools that, like you mentioned, AI, do make certain things easier for us than perhaps they were before, but obviously we're also within reason. Where do you think where's the excitement come from over the next sort of decade, 5 years or so?
Well, I use a term, I call it digital destiny. Digital destiny. where every single industry on earth has a digital destiny in some way or form. And it's about understand. So this brings me back to rethinking the future. Is you have to rethink the future before the future rethinks you, or you have to kind of develop a future strategy before you have to you're forced to change. And I would say that digital is always going to be a very, very big thing. I mean, whether we're talking about AI, whether we talk about robotics, whether we talk about drones that fly themselves, cars that drive themselves, trucks that drive themselves, there's a digital destiny to every industry, including ours, including innovation consulting. Which is why actually I'm working on we developed I think I showed it to you, even a platform for innovation, where we've taken the four lenses and we've digitized everything and we've AI enabled it so that companies can equip themselves with a platform for innovation excellence, really. So I think that that is where a lot of the excitement is going to be, is in what's the digital destiny of this industry. What's the digital destiny of this company? How do we embrace that? How do we win the race to the future? How do we embrace that destiny before we see the tsunami coming, and we're threatened with obsolescence or extinction?
Absolutely. Very good. Fantastic stuff. Thank you ever so much, Rowan. It's been a delight to speak with you. For the audience, maybe you can tell them where they can find you. Well, obviously, we mentioned a number of your books already, but what other sources are there out there to find and learn about your work?
Well, my company is called Imagination Bridge. So imaginationbridge.com. That's going to tell everybody basically what they need to know. But literally, if you type Rowan Gibson into Google, there's a whole bunch of search results that come up, and they'll tell you all about me. But I think Imagination Bridge is certainly a place to go. And I'd probably leave it there. I mean, there's a bunch of other things, but go to the source. That's where you're going to find most of the information.
And I can personally recommend all of your books. They are excellent and real eye-openers for anybody that's looking to learn more about these methods and these approaches that you use. So thank you again, Rowan, and look forward to speaking with you next time.
Thanks, Colin. You have a great day and have a great holiday.
Thank you very much.
Okay, take care.
So that wraps up today's episode of The Innovation Room. Thank you so much for watching or listening. All of the links and resources mentioned throughout the episode will be linked down below in the show notes or the video description, depending on where you're listening. If you're listening to this on a podcast platform, please do leave us a review. If you're watching this on YouTube, consider subscribing. Feel free to leave us comments, questions, or ideas about the episode down below. We'd love to hear what you think. Thank you again for listening, and thank you again to Rowan Gibson. See you next time.